Hi green lovers! In this video we're going to be talking about plants that are a little finicky about being transplanted. Plants like okra or zucchini or bush beans. And I'm going to show you how to transplant them with absolutely no transplant shock every single time. Coming right up. First, let's talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of transplanting. We will then need to anchor our discussion on the topic of roots. Anchor our discussion. Get it? And we'll also talk about a few guidelines around which types of seeds you absolutely do not want to transplant. And finally, we'll get into the grand debate, to direct seed or not to direct seed. Spoiler alert, I'm in the transplant camp. In other words, I do not direct seed, and I'll get into the reasons why in a little bit. And of course, we will wrap the video up with that neat trick that I'm promising you will take your transplanting game to the next level. So before we get into it, if you're getting value from the content that I put out in this channel, I would so appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel and hit that notify button so that you can hear about these videos as soon as I put them out. And if you would be so kind as to hit the like button, it really helps get it out to a broader audience. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about why it is a good idea to start seeds from transplants. One of the main reasons is to get an early start on the season. Now, I live in California. We're able to garden year-round. It is not that important for me to get an early start. But for those of you that live in colder climates, this can easily give you a 6 to 8 week head start on your growing season, and that's a lot. And by the way, did you know that seeds actually like a temperature of somewhere between 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit in order to germinate, but they can grow at optimal temperatures that are about 10 degrees less than that. So all the more reason to give your seeds a nice, warm, cozy environment to get started. The second reason why you might want to start your garden from transplants is because the space that you want to put your plants in is not quite ready yet. You've still got some of your spring season plants growing and growing well, and you don't quite want to pull them up and get your summer plants in just yet. And the third reason why you might want to start your garden from transplants is because when you sow your seeds directly in the garden, your germination can be a little more spotty. You have to keep the seeds constantly moist. It is subject to all kinds of changes in weather conditions, and there are all kinds of little critters that might want to get to your seeds before they have a chance to start their life. As far as the disadvantages, well, the first disadvantage is that it's just an extra step. Rather than direct seeding, you're planting it in a pot, in a container, and then very often you need to uppot them to a bigger container because your garden's not ready, and so on and so forth. So it just gives you more work to do. The second reason is that plants that grow in containers that are small need to be taken care of much more than plants that are planted directly in your garden. One of the reasons is that they dry out easily. This contains very little water, and so you've got to keep an eye on it and make sure that your soil does not dry out, because that will kill your plant. It also needs to be fertilized more regularly. The longer that it stays in this container, the more often you're going to need to fertilize it. And then, yeah, you're not using your space outdoors, but you're taking up space indoors. So that's another reason why you may not have the space indoors to start a lot of seeds. But the biggest issue in my mind is transplant shock. When you plant your plants in the garden and you dislodge them from this container that they've been growing in and you disturb their roots, that really sets them back. It actually cuts into the time that you saved by starting your plant indoors. And it can set the plant back by a week, maybe a couple of weeks, and they struggle during that time. And then there are some plants that absolutely hate being transplanted, like these bean plants. And let's talk about why. For that, we need to have that discussion about roots. Now, there are two main types of roots: tap roots and fibrous roots. Tap roots are the long roots that grow straight down and grow really, really fast, and they're the main root that anchors the plant for a period of time until the plant starts to grow much larger and produce additional roots to support it. These are typically dicot plants or dicotyledon plants, plants that pop out of the ground with 2 leaves. The other type of root, the fibrous roots, are typically found on grasses, things like wheat and rice and corn, and even plants from the onion family have fibrous roots. Now, one of the things about fibrous roots is that they're pretty shallow. They anchor the plant kind of right there. So plants like corn and onions, they require a lot of water because their roots don't go deep down like tap roots, and they're not able to seek out that water that is a little bit further down into the ground. Now, roots serve 3 major purposes for the plant. The first is they absorb water and nutrients. The second is they anchor the plants in the soil. And the third reason is that they store food that is created during photosynthesis for the plant. And let me give you some of the rules I use to decide whether or not I should be direct seeding or whether I should be starting from transplants. The first type of plant that you do not want to start from transplants, and you do not want any disturbance to the roots whatsoever, are root vegetables. For obvious reasons, you disturb their root, you're not going to get a good root harvest. Things like carrots and beets do not like their roots disturbed. So the final category are those plants that are a little bit tricky to transplant into the garden. Now, there are a few reasons why they're so tricky to transplant. One reason is, like in the case of beans, they have extremely strong taproots that grow really fast, really, really deep. So as you can see, compared to this zucchini plant, I've got a much deeper cup that I'm growing this in to give it some time. And I'm not going to have a lot of time because once this thing hits the bottom, it's going to start curling around and it's just not going to be healthy for the plant. So I want to get this pretty quickly. In fact, now's about the time. It's got its first set of true leaves. It's starting to open up its second set of leaves. I'm going to be planting these in the ground this weekend. Okra is the same way. It's got a really strong taproot system. Plants like squashes, cucumbers, and pumpkins and watermelon, those types of plants also don't like being transplanted, but it's mainly because their stems are pretty brittle, and that also means their roots, their taproots, are pretty brittle. They don't go down as deep as a bean plant or an okra plant, but they still go down pretty deep and they are brittle on top of that. So yeah, they don't like being transplanted at all. So let me share with you the main reason why I transplant almost everything into my garden. And that is because I've got a ton of roly-polies or pill bugs in my backyard. After I wood chipped my backyard, they came in their hordes because Mother Nature sent them to decompose my wood chips. So I've got pill bugs everywhere, and they do love tender greens as a snack. So I always start my seeds from transplants. So let's go to the garden now and let's get this in the ground with that magic trick that will give it absolutely no transplant shock. It won't even know that it got transplanted. So this here is my magic trick, folks. It's really, really simple. I just remove the bottom of my plastic cup or paper cup and I bury it, cup and all. I've got this hole that I prepared with a little bit of organic fertilizer at the bottom. Mix it in with the soil because you don't want the roots to sit directly on it, though I will tell you that plants like squash plants do not mind fertilizer or fresh material. You know, you find these things growing in your compost, so they're not as picky about completely decomposed material in the hole that they are growing in. And then all I do is I cover it up with soil and water it in, and I do spray some neem oil around the edge of my cup because that tends to keep the roly-polies away from my plant. But yeah, this plant has absolutely no transplant shock. It doesn't even know that it has been transplanted. I have been hardening it off outside for a few days, so it's used to the outside weather, but that really is all there is to it. You will notice that there are 3 plants in this cup. 1, 2, 3. One of them is already struggling, so that one is probably not going to make it. I will snip it off, but the other two are both looking pretty good. So it's going to be a tough choice. I have a feeling the roly-polies are going to help me make the choice because they're going to take at least one or two of these plants out. So there is an advantage, at least for me, to grow multiple plants in the same spot. And I will ruthlessly remove two of these plants if all three of them survive. And you can see that I've done the same with my snake gourd there. I've got a delicata squash, same thing. Got a fantastic chayote that I also started the same way in a pot that I put directly into the soil after removing the bottom of it, and it's growing really, really nicely now that the weather has started warming up. I've got a little loofah gourd growing there. Look how pretty those leaves are. And look at my bitter melon plant. It is not exactly the prettiest seedling. It's one of those ugly ducklings that grows into a beautiful swan though. So all my bitter melons started off with these gnarly looking leaves. I'm not really sure why, but I can see that the second leaves are coming in nicely. So I have hope that this plant is going to thrive. Yeah, so these are all the little plants that I am growing that are enjoying being transplanted without transplant shock. I hope you learned something from this video, and again, do hit that like button. It does help it get out to a broader audience. And until next time, live green and love your greens.